Welcome back to Squawk Box. President-elect Trump outlining his second term, his foreign policy agenda in a speech on Tuesday. I want to bring in Council on Foreign Relations President Michael Froman, who served as U.S. trade rep in the Obama administration. I want to thank you for joining us. A lot of different sort of foreign policy pieces to this. Obviously, there's Canada, there's the Panama Canal, there's Greenland. The list goes on. You want to take your pick and start wherever you like in terms of what you think is realistic here.
You know, as in a lot of issues, I think President Trump has a very unconventional way of addressing issues, but there's often a little grain of truth in what he says that has to be taken seriously. So should we be concerned about Chinese expansive activity in Latin America and their role in port infrastructure in our hemisphere? Absolutely. Is threatening to take over the Panama Canal the best way to do that? Probably not, but it could lead to a further conversation about what role the U.S. plays in the region and how we ensure that we're able to have freedom of navigation, like we're fighting for against the Houthis in the Red Sea and like we're maintaining in the South China Sea. And similarly for Greenland, the issues of Arctic security, the fact that climate change is making the Northern Passage a potentially significant trade route, and the fact that Greenland has a tremendous amount of minerals, those are all real issues. Again, threatening to take it over by force or insisting on buying it may not be the best way to develop the issue, but it is putting an issue on the agenda that actually does have some significant merit. The other thing I would just say, Andrew, is if you go back in history, in 1947, evidently there were secret conversations about buying Greenland for $100 million of gold bars. So it's not the first time the idea has been put on the table. Of course, the world has changed a lot since 1947. And my understanding is people in Greenland are quite independently minded and probably would not look fondly on the idea of being sold to the United States.
You know, where I want to go with this is I want to get to the Middle East, because that's to me, the hot spot. And he talked about all hell breaking loose if Hamas does not return hostages. That seems to me to be the closest thing to being a realistic challenge/problem that's actually already a problem that needs to get solved. And then maybe we can talk about Canada. Maybe we go there. What do you think really happens on the day of his inauguration if, in fact, Hamas does not return the hostages?
I think the sense is that the Israelis may well know where most of the hostages are in Gaza, but that based on some of their recent efforts to rescue hostages, there's a concern that any movement towards rescuing them would lead to their murder. And so the question will be, does Israel go in even further? Is there another aggressive effort to level parts of Gaza where the hostages and where Hamas leadership may still be being hidden and having more carnage than we've seen before? And does Prime Minister Netanyahu, with President Trump's support, feel like he's got the green light to do that? Ideally, it's the threat of all hell breaking loose that could potentially bring Hamas to the table. But my understanding is that the conversations about a ceasefire and a hostage exchange haven't really progressed as far as the negotiators had expected, and that they're stuck. And so that leaves the option of further military action, which means further civilian deaths as well, and also potentially Israeli soldier deaths, and the deaths of potentially the deaths of more of the hostages themselves.
Shall we go to Canada and go north, Ambassador? What do you think the folks in Canada are thinking about all this? And what do you think the real impact is of even just rhetorically talking about turning Canada into the 51st state?
Look, unlike Mexico, where I think the president has laid out issues that he wants to see addressed, whether it's the fentanyl issue, or whether it's transshipment of Chinese goods, or some of the criminal gang issues, it's unclear what it is that he's got against Canada or what it is he's seeking them to do. We have a very close integrated trade relationship with Canada. It would be highly disruptive if that were to break down through tariffs and other mechanisms, including in the U.S. auto industry and U.S. steel industry, which are highly integrated industries across the border. I think the Canadians are very dependent on the United States. Some very significant percentage of Canadians, something like 70%, live within 100 miles of the U.S. border. Their economy is totally dependent on the United States, but they are a proud nation and they enjoy their independence. And again, there may be issues we can put on the agenda, and the president has certainly gotten the attention of Canadian leadership and the Canadian political system. The question is whether threatening to annex them as the 51st state or pursuing this in some other means might be more productive.
So part of the rhetorical question about all of these issues that he's talked about is whether you think it projects power. It creates power that maybe had been lacking before, right? And, the advocates for President Trump would say that's what he is doing, and that he is putting the country back on the world stage in a sort of different dimension. Do you buy that?
You know, I think that that is certainly an effort he is trying to make. I think there's a question that if you assert something and then don't achieve it, does that help expand your power, or does it actually undermine your power over time and your credibility in terms of exercising that power? But he certainly feels that by making these threats, by making these demands, he's setting a negotiating agenda. He wants to negotiate from strength, and then he will declare victory on whatever it is he has negotiated. He did this with China during the first term, where he negotiated the so-called, phase one trade deal. It wasn't a very significant trade deal, but having made such a big deal of it, he declared victory, and that's where it stands. So my sense is, if you really want to exercise American power, which I think is very important, one of the key elements of American power are American allies and partners, something that China doesn't have. We have this network of alliances around the world, which is incredibly valuable to us. It has other countries paying and putting both the lives of their people on the line, as well as their treasure on the line, on behalf of issues that we care about as well, on behalf of issues that we're leading on. And so I think sticking your finger in the eyes of allies and partners, I think over time actually reduces your power, doesn't increase it.
Yeah.